everyone. And today we are sitting down with Antonia, and she is going to talk to us a little bit about what impressed her from this last week's readings from Palm Sunday. And there's a lot of things that she has brought up actually already, so I'm excited to really get into this conversation. But if we remember, this past Sunday was Palm Sunday, and it's a very unique Sunday because we celebrate a lot in one day. Of course, if we just look at it as a standalone day, it's commemorating the day that Jesus enters into Jerusalem during the week, which is going to end up with his passion, death, and resurrection. But what we do on Palm Sunday is we actually hear all the events of the week in that one day. Well, at least most of them. So the events of Holy Thursday and Good Friday are recalled in the reading of the Passion. So we have that very long gospel, of course, that we all participate in. So today, Antonia, you're going to, I think, really take the lead here, because I just want to see what you want to talk about the most, because there's so many things to talk about with the amount of scripture that came our way. So I'm going to hand it over to you, because I think that you're going to do a great job in bringing a lot of great things to life here.
Yeah, it was, it was incredibly rich. Like you said, there's just so many different feelings that that emerge from this. And one thing, I think from your homily, I was really struck by the idea of this sudden shift and the shaking, the earthquake. And then thinking about that shift and how we behave in our lives. You mentioned that when people are coming in during Palm Sunday, when Jesus comes to Jerusalem, he's got the palms are waving and everybody's welcoming him. And then a few days later, they're saying, crucify him. And so that shift, it was tremendous. And then it made me also think of the line that Jesus spoke to the disciples before he was going to go through with his passion, which was that the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And this idea that you want to do something good, but then all of a sudden you do the opposite. So it made me think about those things in the context of the shift of our reactions in life. And so I wanted to know if you could speak to more of that.
Yeah, I think the shift, what it does for all of us, as we can see, of course, within the context of the Passion, and also I think definitely within the context of what we're dealing here with now with the coronavirus, is that the shift exposes our vulnerabilities, and it exposes our weaknesses, and it really exposes our helplessness. So this whole idea that I do the things I don't want to do, even though I have the best intentions, is a way of showing that, yeah, we're kind of helpless or we're powerless in doing ultimately the good. And that is a really important shift to get to with each of us individually, and whether that's brought about because of just the external circumstances, which is of course what we're dealing with right now, or with just an internal type of movement, which all of us have to deal with at some point, is that the minute we get to the point of realizing that we are completely helpless and that we cannot, using our own strength and our own ability, do things that we want to do the good, let's just say, that's when we're actually creating a space, if you kind of look at it that way, for Christ to work through us, so that it's he who does the good through us, not us doing the good. All right, and I think that might be a good place to kind of shift, or to kind of unpack, I should say, because the shift ultimately for each of us is coming to this realization that my life is really not about me doing things good. It's ultimately about allowing Christ to work through me to be a means of his good.
Yeah, that strikes me, because the idea of the shift going from, I to you, or something like that. I'm thinking of, I'm a follower of Bishop Barron. I was thinking about what he said at some point. He quoted someone as saying, think of the cross as the I canceled out. And I thought that was an interesting way of looking at it. That this idea of, like you said, getting to that vulnerable state and trying to relinquish control, so that you can let, as you said, like Christ work through you. I know, I think that's a lot of us are feeling like we in that state right now. So I suppose it's, so how is it that, how do you shift from the idea to the action, and having those things be parallel? How does that work, do you think, with the resurrection? Is that part of the saving?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, I think alluding to this too from the homily on Sunday is just that, when we think about vulnerability in our lives, like the moments where we actually kind of are okay with vulnerability, it probably most likely and is always in the context of relationships with people. Now, I would say that this is the most, pronounced with a husband and a wife, right? Where, there's a real vulnerability that has to emerge there in that relationship, that ought to emerge. And it's not something that you're really ashamed of. It actually is what allows you to be loved by the other and allows you to want to love the other more. So since we're kind of like hardwired in that type of way to receive love and give love, which is all about a complete openness to seeing, everything exposed, so to speak, the warts and all of our partners, that actually is a way to allow ourselves to be able to respond greater to the needs in front of us, and also to allow our needs to be responded to by those who love us. So then you take that disposition, so to speak, that can happen between two people who are in love with each other, and realize that ultimately that is made for our relationship with God. Marriage is just one kind of manifestation of our relationship with God, or just our encounter or our relationship with our family and friends, another type of manifestation of our relationship with God. Those are very localized types of relationships, but our relationship with God uses the same type of mechanism, so to speak, or the same type of process of being completely vulnerable. So until we get to the place of realizing that I'm made to be completely loved and to be accepted for who I am, and I in turn have to be completely open to who God is and how God reveals himself to me, that's when this whole thing actually starts to take place. So only when you're able to accept, say, so to speak, the ugliness that we can see within God, meaning like the crucifixion, only by getting to that point of being so open to that, that we're actually open to the gift of eternal life, which is brought about through the resurrection. So does that make sense? I mean, I know I'm throwing a lot of out. Yeah,
no, I think it makes sense, especially when you think about how much, going through the Bible about wedding feasts, right? I mean, so much happens, and thinking about, that considering the bridegroom, right? And just, so I think that makes sense. And, it also makes me think of something I pray on is the litany of trust. And I've been saying that a lot over Lent. So that idea of is a kind of surrendering of vulnerability.
Yeah.
The other thing that I wanted, so in the idea that you just mentioned, that to see the ugliness of, when you said it kind of the ugliness of God, like seeing something so tremendously upsetting and allowing that pain to enter you so you can feel the love. Is that what you are talking about?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's not just by chance that the symbol that we see the most, profoundly in a Catholic church is the crucifix, right? I mean, and I don't think that maybe we'd really let that sink in. I mean, it's almost kind of absurd to think that the thing that we identify with as Christians is a dead person on a cross. I mean, that just seems to be like, there's nothing triumphal about that, right? There's nothing to be proud of if you're just to not understand what that is, right? Mm-hmm. But the fact that we kind of double down, so to speak, on suffering and how God suffers, that's simply because we understand that like suffering is the place that allows us to completely become vulnerable. I mean, you just become vulnerable through your sufferings, and that widens your heart even more to receive the love of God. And the love of God is just completely infinite, meaning there's no start or no limit to it. So there's really never going to be a moment where you won't be suffering, because you're always trying to enlarge, so to speak, your capacity to receive God's love. But that always requires some type of death to your own desires and your own wants and your own needs. So each one of those old deaths is a form of suffering, but as each one happens, your heart is widened more and more to receive this infinite love of God. I mean, this is why even there's some saints who will even talk about that. Even in heaven, there is a type of suffering that happens in heaven. Now, granted, it's not like the same type of, painful suffering that we would kind of experience here on earth, but because of the fact that we desire more and more of God for all of eternity, there's always going to be like this, like, well, already, but not yet. Like, I've received so much, but I want more and more. And like, just like when you are desiring to see a loved one who you're not in the presence with, and I think we can all relate to that right now, it's that absence, which is a type of suffering, but it's a suffering that's a good suffering, because that means that you just want the person more, right? I mean, so it's a nuanced way, I guess we could say, of understanding suffering, but it is still suffering.
Yeah, and that makes sense, because even those moments, I always have these, and I think everyone has experienced a moment where you just feel God, and inside that feeling, but it's not all the time, right? You don't have it all the time. So you look for those moments, but it always has to be received. So I think I understand what you're saying. There is like this desire for more of that. I read a kind of interesting, on a side note, a woman who wrote about suffering. She said that she was suffering, and she said she realized that suffering was a gift for her to give others, because it allowed others to take care of her. So it was a gift because it brought out the best in them. And I thought that was an interesting way of how suffering can unite in a way. It allowed her to be passive, and that passion is about taking in pain so that others can bring goodness to you, or bring out the goodness in them. So I thought that was an interesting way, just to add.
There's always two-way traffic when it comes to these things. I think we get very obsessed, maybe as Christians, thinking like, what's my calling? What am I supposed to do? I got to make sure I'm like, always living this virtuous life, and I got to make sure I'm here for this person and serving that person. But the reality is like, goes both ways, and you really don't know who you're meant to be for other people unless you let other people impress themselves upon you first, actually. Mm-hmm. So until you allow yourself to be served, so to speak, by others, or to at least encounter the other, then you know what to do. I'm always taken by this when Jesus is the one curing of a blind man, and when you have this man who's clearly blind, right? And comes up to Jesus, and Jesus's first interaction with him is he asks him the question, "What do you want me to do for you?" Right? Mm-hmm. Jesus doesn't just assume, oh, this guy he's blind and he wants to see, so I guess I'm going to cure him of that because that's what he wants. He doesn't assume that he knows what the person wants. He has to let the person say it so that he can respond to what is being presented to him. And that's a great model for us, that we have to allow others to reveal themselves to us in different ways before we can even initiate acts of charity towards them.
That's interesting that you brought up the question, like, what do you want me to do for you? And then his listening. And I had mentioned this to you earlier about that, I came back to Catholicism after a long hiatus, and it was through my father's death. And I was with him at his death, but I was with him beforehand. And he had me read to him from this, a memoir by a nun, and about her battle with cancer. And after I would read he would ask me questions like you're talking about. And it wasn't until later that I realized it wasn't because he didn't know the answers to the questions. He wanted me to be interactive with him so he could share with me. So I'm wondering, that's, I think what you're saying, that always that relationship is the key, I suppose.
Right, totally. I mean, and that goes to the broader question of discernment, which we're already touching on here, that, so much of us discerning things is not really about us kind of figuring things out on our own. It's about being so open to what's being given to us.
Mm.
I'm constantly reminded with that. I mean, even as a priest, I mean, you may think that like, okay, I've discerned what I'm supposed to do with my life. I'm a priest. So but it's not as if, okay, now I'm done with discernment, right? I mean, like, it's really each day, it's like, okay, how am I supposed to be present to what it is that God wants me to do today? Not because it's like me trying to figure it out on my own by thinking of with all these grand ideas and visions and things like that, but it's really how present I am to the present that allows me to truly allow myself to discern where I'm being drawn. So I think many of us make discernment far harder on ourselves because we always have these grandiose visions of something that's about to happen, like in the future, let's say. Like if we have this grand vision, like, oh, I just want to, like, I don't know, create this massive organization that's going to bring all this healing to all these people who are suffering from lack of food in some type of third world country, let's say. I mean, like, you have this whole idea, and it's great to have these great visions and ideas, but the reality is that everything happens in the moment, right? One moment at a time. And if that is the ultimate vision, so to speak, and it's very particular, it will only be affirmed, so to speak, the more present you are to each moment and what's presented to you in the moment. And it may eventually lead to this vision that you had, or it may go someplace different. But it doesn't matter, because if you're responding to things one moment at a time, it's building off of each other and going where it's supposed to go. My discernment, for example, as a priest, I mean, I had an idea when I was in first grade, I wanted to be a priest. And like, so you could say, oh, well, I knew all along I was going to be a priest, but I can't say that was really true, because I did lots of other things between when I was in first grade till I think I was 35 or something when I was ordained. I mean, that's a long period of time where you're doing lots of other things, but I can say that I was discerning each part of the way, just responding to what it was that, at least I would think that God was revealing to me from one moment to the next, although clearly there's things that I regret doing too, but still, yeah.
Well, it makes me also think about I remember your homily, which struck me, was about Martha and Mary. It kind of goes to that idea of the contemplative, somebody's open to listening versus somebody's doing and constantly moving. So that kind of speaks to a little bit to what you're saying. Because Martha is somebody who has plans, constantly has little plans of what she's got to do. And they're important. Like you're saying, it's important to have plans, but then to be open too. And Mary, who's sort of just sitting and listening and trying to be, and she's in that moment, not thinking about how she has to sweep or need to help her sister. So I think that's something that it's good that you mentioned, because so much of it, I know I'm a planner, so trying to let that go to allow the spirit to work through you more, and people through the spirit working through them.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to know that plans are really, we're only able to make plans because we're able to think about things in the future, right? So our mind is able to make plans. And of course, that's all very important. We all have our planners and things like that, so to speak, that we're jotting things in. I think that this virus, though, right now has kind of like stopped the idea of planning. I mean, it's pretty amazing. I mean, can we honestly say, okay, well, in June, I'm going to be doing X, Y, and Z? I mean, like, I don't think any of us can really even say that right now. I mean, it's so amazing that we are in a place where we have to be completely present to the moment. And we may kind of get frustrated by that, thinking like, I just wish I had a confidence that, say come June, I can go wherever, to the beach or wherever it may be. But, but I also think it's kind of a little bit exciting to know that maybe there's someplace even better that I'm going to be drawn to or taken to, let's say in June, because I just have to be so radically present to things as they come one day at a time right now. So what may be in store for me could be far greater than what I can just come up in my mind and think as being my plan. And I think that it really requires a certain type of ability to understand that the present moment is the only moment that really matters, and that your plans work themselves out the more responsive you are to things as they come one moment at a time.
Yeah, it's well, almost like we're in a forced retreat in a way, right? And if anybody's gone to retreat, you sort of are very, very conscious of the moment, because you're putting everything on hold to discern and to go back refreshed. So in a way, we're all in our spiritual retreats right now. And I suppose it's an opportunity.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, this is even different than a retreat in a certain sense, because think about how much we plan a retreat, right? I mean, like, we're like, okay, I'm going to be away for these, like, for 7 days or something, whatever, a week, let's say, and then when I come back, I'm going to blah 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 blah. Right? I mean, like, we don't even have the luxury of knowing what's going to happen at the end of this retreat. Like, we can't even, like, say, oh, I'm going to have all these other things on my calendar once I come back from spending whatever amount of time I'm away. Like, it's amazing, because it's like it's a retreat that has, like, that's open-ended, completely open-ended. And I think that even we can manipulate our retreat experience so much, because we could say, well, I only have so much time to be on retreat, and gosh darn it, I'm going to do these things during this time, and I'm going to have this answer when I'm done, and whether it is the answer or not, it's going to be an answer. And I think we can manipulate our planned retreats a lot. This one here is like, yeah, we're on a retreat, but it's so open-ended that you can't manipulate it. So, it's interesting.
True. That's very true. It's real. I guess all of us who have like to control things are now getting a wake-up call in terms of that. But I'm also thinking about how this virus, going back to what we were talking about also with the scripture about suffering, because I heard on one podcast that this man said, we have people die of starvation. Millions of people die of starvation every year, and we don't talk about that as a pandemic, right?
Right.
And yet, with this now, we have suffering on a scale that's similar to that. But why does this get the attention? And I found that very interesting to think about, right? Because this is affecting all across class lines, and it is making us aware of suffering in the world, or making us have a new appreciation of the world in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's interesting. I mean, I think in the United States alone, like, prior to the coronavirus, like, there's anywhere from 8,000 to 10,000 people who die every day in the United States, just from all different types of things, right? I mean, so we're losing, in a regular, normal time, 8,000 to 10,000 people a day from lots of different ways of dying, right? So mortality, so to speak, is always in our midst, right? But we don't really think about it, because we usually feel as if we can control when we're going to die in a certain way, or we kind of feel like we can control how we're going to, our treatment when things seem to be, when we seem to not be healthy or something. I think the thing about this thing here is, I don't think it's so much about the numbers of people dying, I mean, which are definitely, a stunning number. It's more about this, like, fear of, like, we can't really control this. Like, we don't know really what's going to happen here. And so it's more of a shock in our system, because it's like, oh, we can't control death. I think that's kind of maybe why this is impacting us right now. Because we're reminded once again that we can't control death, regardless of how we die. We just can't control it. And I think that right here is one of these, another opportunity to understand that when we give up on the need for control, that's a tangible way, if you will, of allowing God to love us. I mean, I think I was even saying this, I think, in the homily, where it was just like, none of us like being in controlling relationships with our partners. I mean, like, we know how problematic that is. So it's the same thing in our relationship with God. If we're trying to control how we think God should be and how God should act and how God should treat us and all that kind of stuff, well, our relationship is going to be terribly frustrating with God. But the minute that we come to places like, no, I have to trust that I'm meant to be loved completely, that means I have to let go of the need to control anything, and then to allow that love to kind of then take me over. And which is exactly what the resurrection shows to us. It's just that death will bring life. I mean, there's no other way around it, because it's not just a death for the sake of dying. It's a widening of the heart to receive the life that's waiting for us, and that's what we're really preparing ourselves for in this world. A lot of times people could ask, like, well, if we're all going to die, why did God, like, even bother making us, doing all this whole thing? Is this just kind of like, can't we just like all jump off the bridge and get this over with? I mean, like, no, because what we're doing here is in time widening our capacity to really understand and receive how much God wants to give us. And it requires, like I said, continuous suffering, continuous death, until we then make the transfer, so to speak, from this world to the next.
That's true, because I think, obviously through the Bible, God is love. So what you're talking about is allowing, those are synonymous and interchangeable to think about that. And I think we've kind of gone full circle with all of that. And I think maybe the discernment comes through the opening up of yourself to love and vulnerability. And then discernment comes from that. Is that how you would?
It's all interrelated. Yeah, exactly. I mean, the more you're open to love, the more open you are responding to that love, which is part of the discernment process. And the more that you discern how you're being called, what to do, how that love gives you a confidence, so to speak, that love is continuing to provide for you from this day forward into this world to the next. Resurrection.
And that's what we have to look forward to, at least for Easter Sunday. So do you have any thoughts about how, thinking about the resurrection in the context of this and this particular Easter Sunday?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, I think that the resurrection, first off, is always a way to affirm, our faith, by being reminded that a faithful God comes to us. Meaning that, the resurrection that we celebrate on Sunday, which we really celebrate every day. I mean, we don't like pretend right now that Jesus isn't risen. I mean, he already has risen. But what we celebrate on Easter Sunday is this sense of faith. But it's not celebrating our faith in God or our faith in the resurrection. It's actually celebrating God's faithfulness to us. Mm-hmm. So the same God who's gotten us through so many other things in our life, let's say up to this point, is the same God who's going to continue to provide for us as we continue the duration of this virus and where it's going.
Yeah, that's, I was thinking, because I also teach catechism class, and I always think what comes up is, why would God allow certain things, and, why would he put an apple for Eve to be tempted? And this idea that, that he's always reaching out in love. It's a matter of how we respond to him more than he's always the same, but we are not necessarily. And so it's that we have that free will to determine how we're going to interact in that relationship, and being open, like you said, or being closed, or helping or not helping. All those are decisions we're always making. And, so, I think that it's hard, because I think what you just did there is a subtle shift. It's not about our faith. It's about his reaching out to us, and so it's so hard, because our whole society is not about the other coming to us. It's always about us doing it to the other or something, that we're always the active people. And it's so hard, this combination of free will and yet that God is in control, like that's somehow hard, and then our society on top of that.
Yeah. Well, I think that, I think it's important to look once again with this idea of, yeah, God is in control in the sense that like everything is held and suspended by his care. I mean, like nothing would exist without God desiring it and willing it. But I think when it comes to our relationship with God, God doesn't exert control in our relationship with him. So, I mean, he may know, what's going to happen. He may, but that doesn't really say that he's controlling those things to happen or willing those things to happen. So there is no control on God's part towards us. And that's why, of course, we're called to not to control our relationship with God. I mean, like, whenever we're making our plans, we're in a certain sense saying, we have this figured out better than God could possibly have it figured out. And it's up to us. It's almost like virtuous in a certain sense that we kind of think that I'm being so responsible with my plans, right? So I think that the control thing works on both sides. God lets go of controlling himself in his relationship with us individually, and we're called to let go of the need to control God in our relationship with him. And only when that notion of control is just kind of let go, then you're able to see that, oh, at every moment, I'm experiencing the love, the faithfulness of God. And of course, the resurrection is the quintessential realization of that even death is not going to stop, God wanting to give me the fullness of life, his faithfulness to me.
Yeah. I always find, I know that we're going to be heading towards that, which is on Good Friday, which I'll miss, but I mean, just everybody going up to the cross, and just that was so incredibly powerful, going back to what you were saying before. And I was thinking that it's a visceral reaction, right? It's something you can't even put into words to think about that kind of sacrifice. And then also thinking that you would have been there and probably would have been the same as everybody else that was probably there. I mean, you'd like to think that you would be Veronica, but maybe not. And the fact that God will still love you and that he died for us despite that, right, is always just, it's incredibly awesome. I mean, it makes you think that that it's sort of, it is sort of the beyond us, but at the same time includes us.
Mm-hmm. That's a very beautiful way of saying it. I think that's a great last word there, Antonia. So I'm getting the signal that we've been talking for quite a bit.
That's easy to do.
And we could talk much longer, I'm sure. But is there anything else you wanna finish up with?
No, I think that this was a great discussion. You really made me think a lot.
Well, you made me think a lot too. I mean, I'm in the midst right now of finishing up these meditations on the Station of the Cross. So this is definitely helping me to kind of meditate deeper in what's going on.
Thank you so much for sharing and being so generous with your time.
Oh, no problem. I mean, we are just kind of stuck here on the rectory for most of the day. Anyway, all right. Well, many blessings, and I hope that for the rest of you who are watching this, that you're able to pray for both of us, and hopefully we are unpacking some more of the richness of how God speaks to us through the Word, especially during this time when we can't receive the sacraments, but we can definitely still receive the sacrament of the Word at any time. So, thank you, Antonia.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
God bless you all.